Arbitrum's latest upgrade from this month is a big step in not only optimizing it for the users and the institutions using it right now, but it also future-proofs how it handles block space when periods of high demand inevitably come. So today, we're going to talk about what changed, I'll explain it very simply, how it impacts you, the end user, and how this upgrade allows Arbitrum to scale much further than ever before. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. So first of all, what changed? Well, as of January 8th, 2026, when this upgrade took place, the following occurred. The amount of gas targets on Arbitrum One increased from 1 to 6, and the gas targets themselves went from just 7 megagas per second to 10, 14, 20, 29, 41, and 60 megagas per second, alongside the Arbitrum DAO giving Off-Chain Labs the right to add up to 10 gas targets in total and modify them up to 100 megagas per second. And by the way, I know all that stuff is very, very complex and doesn't really make any sense. That's what we're going to jump into very quickly. Just stay with me. The other thing that changed was the minimum L2 base fee was increased from 0.01 GUI per gas to 0.02 GUI per gas. First, let's talk about the gas target. And to explain this, I'll use a car engine as an example. Arbitrum One is the engine, and the gas targets are the various speeds that we'll get into. So let's assume that the engine for a car is designed to go 60 miles an hour. This is Arbitrum One before the upgrade. This means that any speed the car goes at below 60 miles an hour, for the purpose of this explanation, we'll assume that the petrol usage remains constant throughout. Once it hits above 60 miles per hour, the amount of petrol needed goes up exponentially to the point where every mile faster than 60 that the car goes, the pedal is being floored and the engine is burning through petrol like there's no tomorrow, making it very, very expensive to drive at those speeds. Now, this new engine is designed to go 70 miles per hour. Similar to before, this means that any speed the car goes at below 70 miles an hour, the petrol usage is constant. However, this time, there are multiple speed brackets with varying amounts of petrol needed to sustain those speeds, increasing exponentially higher as the car goes faster. So for example, anywhere between 70 and 80 miles per hour, petrol usage creeps up just a little bit. Anywhere between 80 and 90 miles an hour, petrol usage starts to become much more noticeable. Anywhere between 95 and 120 miles an hour, petrol usage is high. And then anything above 120, petrol usage is literally through the roof. And something to note is within those final brackets, especially above 120, the actual change in petrol usage increases and decreases very, very dramatically. And you'll see how that correlates to Arbitrum One and Gast in a second. So the main difference in both these examples is that in the first example, there's only one speed that if you start to drive faster than, you immediately start burning through petrol. And in the second example, there's multiple speeds that start off as very forgiving, but once you start to hit those higher brackets, the petrol needed to continue going those speeds exponentially increases, making the second engine much more efficient. Now, how does this relate to Arbitrum One post-upgrade? When periods of high demand and congestion come in, what this means is, with the minimum gas target increased from 7 megagas per second to at least 10, this gives Arbitrum One much more headroom before that first gas target is hit and congestion kicks in. And the additional brackets, which is honestly the real innovation here, those extra 5 gas targets that I mentioned, this allows for gas costs to rise at a much more gradual pace, ultimately lowering the max gas price that would have been hit and allowing people to still process transactions at a reasonable price relative to demand. So even more straightforward, Arbitrum One can now process more transactions before congestion starts to kick in, number one. And even then, the gas price users will pay will go up much more gradually if demand increases instead of spiking too high to the point where things like apps or oracles cannot catch up. High gas prices essentially are much less severe, much less frequent, and much more dampened than before. So what this means for you, the end user, is that transactions will fail much less often when high demand and spikes of congestion come in. Fees won't jump from cheap to almost unusable in an instant, at least much, much, much less often. And of course, apps feel much more reliable during launches, mints, and just in general, volatile markets. What do the numbers look like? Well, let's talk about it. The Off-Chain Labs team modeled what the gas prices could have looked like on October 10th, one of the worst days for the crypto market in history, compared to what they actually were, and found that there was a 33 GUI or 129% difference between the peak of the gas prices between what they actually rose to versus what they could have risen to. And now looking post-upgrade, on January 13th, when there was also a very, very high spike in demand and tons of volatile market activity, the gas usage in the network was around 62 megagas per second, but the price only went to 0.072 GUI per gas. So comparing the two, back on October 10th, the demand was only 43 megagas per second, but the price was 40 GUI per gas. So just off those two instances alone, you can really see how much more capacity Arbitrum One now has for loading the network with tons of more transactions, tons of more activity before it hits these periods of high congestion. As part of the upgrade, Off-Chain Labs was also granted the ability to modify the gas target numbers, the amount of gas targets, and the adjustment windows for each target for 2 years. So compared to the previous system that only had one gas target at 7 megagas per second, the new current numbers are as follows: 10, 14, 20, 29, 41, and 60. These are the numbers I mentioned earlier in the video. And as for the adjustment windows, not to go too deep into it, but that is essentially how long the gas target will stay that amount until it readjusts and figures out where the new gas target will be. The introduction of multiple gas targets is very novel in the world of blockchains, especially L2s. The idea of having just one gas target, which is what Arbitrum had before, Ethereum has it, a lot of other competing L1s and L2s, most of them have the same system, which is why when they congest, they usually instantly feel unusable. So if you're building an Arbitrum post-upgrade, which means right now, this reduces tail risk for applications during peak usage, it makes gas costs much more predictable for teams operating at scale, and it improves reliability guarantees for infrastructure and those institutional users. Okay, now the second upgrade, this is going to be much more simple and much more to the point. The minimum L2 base fee was increased from 0.01 Gwei per gas to 0.02 Gwei per gas, essentially doubled. You may be wondering, what is a L2 base fee? Very quickly, the breakdown of how fees work on Arbitrum One is as follows. There is an L1 base fee for the L1 chain, which is Ethereum. There is an L2 base fee for the chain on top, which is Arbitrum. And then of course, each of their own have what we call surplus fees, which essentially is just the price paid above the minimum base fee price. For the most part, it's probably going to remain zero, but during times of congestion, when there's a lot more activity going on, that's when you'll have those surplus fees come into play. And one of the ideas behind this, because the network can now handle congestion and activity much more efficiently than before, the possibility for more spam increases. And one way to decrease spam is to increase the bottom line amount that someone would have to spend to use the network in general. If you're talking about the average person, like for example me, I use Arbitrum One all the time, you're not going to notice it. It's extremely small. It's an adjustment that the end user doesn't really feel because the increase is ever so slight, but the bottom line for chain revenue does go up. In a way, compensating a little bit for the more efficient gas pricing mechanism we spoke about earlier. And that not necessarily being the intent, but just being kind of a byproduct of trying to counteract that spam that may potentially come. And that's it for the upgrade. Apps and users all across Arbitrum are now benefiting from this change right now. And of course, companies and projects running their own Arbitrum chains can apply this upgrade to their chain right now. So what do you think? Did you learn anything from this video? Are you an expert on all things gas now? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.